I suppose if my life had a sound right now, it would be the old kitchen clock above the stove. Steady, a little too loud, always there whether you want to hear it or not. I wake up to it most mornings before the sun, that click-tick like a tiny hammer tapping on the inside of my chest, reminding me that time is still moving, even when the days all look the same. Last Sunday started just like any other. I shuffled to the bathroom, washed my face, noticed more lines around my mouth, put on the same soft blue sweater Tom always liked, even though he's been gone long enough that his opinion shouldn't matter, and still somehow does. The house felt cool. October has a way of sneaking into your bones in this part of the country, sliding under doors, creeping through window frames I put on the kettle, set out 4 mismatched mugs for later, and took the potatoes from the pantry. Susan and Mark were coming with the kids, and I've learned that no matter how the years pass, there is comfort in at least one familiar dish on the table. Potato salad, my old faithful companion. I could probably make it in my sleep. My hands moved on their own, peeling, rinsing, chopping, while my mind wandered to things I don't say out loud. How quiet the house has become, how the phone rings less, how I sometimes talk to Tom in the evenings and catch myself waiting for him to answer. By the time their van pulled into the driveway, the kitchen already smelled of eggs and mustard and onions and that faint tang of dill. I watched through the window as they piled out. Susan in her practical coat, Mark juggling grocery bags and his keys, Lily with her face lit blue from whatever was on her phone, Noah dragging his feet but smiling when he saw the front door. That smile of his still melts me. It has a little of Mark and a little of Tom in it, a softness around the edges. I heard the front door open, Susan's bright "Hi, Mom," echoing down the hall. They filled the entryway with cold air and the smell of some new fabric softener. There were hugs, quick, distracted, and the usual comments. "It's chilly in here. You should get that step fixed, Mom. Wow, this place feels smaller than I remember." That last one stung more than it should have. Houses don't shrink. People just start bringing more of their lives with them. When they visit, more opinions, more judgments. I pointed them toward the dining room, told them the food would be ready soon, and returned to my work at the counter. The sounds of their conversation drifted back. Lily complaining about homework, Noah asking if the Wi-Fi still worked, Mark mentioning something about overtime at work. I chopped the last potato into careful cubes, enjoying the small satisfaction of even pieces. And that's when Susan's voice cut through the rest. "I don't know, Mark. She just can't keep up with this house anymore," she said, low, but not low enough. My hand stopped midair. "Look at the stairs, the yard, the repairs. It's too much for her." Mark answered quietly, "We've talked about this, Susie. Let's not get into it right now." But he didn't sound like a man defending his mother. He sounded like someone tired of repeating himself. "I'm not trying to be mean," she insisted. "I'm trying to plan. She's almost 80. We have to be realistic." I turned on the faucet, both to rinse the knife and to cover the way my breath had caught in my throat. Almost 80, as if age were a verdict instead of just a number of mornings survived. I stood there, water running over my fingers, and listened as my own future was discussed. 2 rooms away. Susan ticked off examples. The missed doctor's appointment last month, the time I called her twice because I'd misplaced the little calendar Noah made me last Christmas, The way I held onto the railing when I went down the front steps each small moment, a brick in the case she was building. I dried my hands, squared my shoulders, and carried the bowl into the dining room. Their voices sliced off mid-sentence. 4 faces turned toward me with the same expression, part surprise, part relief, part guilt. "Potato salad," I said more cheerfully than I felt, "before Noah eats all the chips." They laughed too quickly. We sat. I watched them around my table, the one Tom and I saved for months to buy. He'd sanded the legs himself so they wouldn't scratch the floor. Now it was covered in paper napkins and fingerprints I would wipe away after they went home. For a while, we talked about safe things: the weather, Lily's classes, Noah's basketball tryouts, Mark's workload. Susan made a point of asking if I'd remembered my medication that morning. My jaw clenched, but I answered calmly, "Yes, dear. The same way I remembered yours when you were 5 and refused to take your antibiotics unless they were disguised in orange juice." That got a small smile out of Mark and a raised eyebrow out of Susan. She doesn't enjoy being reminded she was ever the one who needed me. Eventually, like I knew she would, she steered the talk back to her favorite topic. "Mom," she began, using the voice she reserves for serious conversations and telemarketers, "we wanted to tell you about this new place we found. It's called Lakeview Village. They've got little cottages now, not just the main building with the nursing home, independent living. It's actually really nice." The way she said "actually" made me want to ask her how many unpleasant places she'd imagined putting me in before this one appeared. Little porches, community center, walking trails, a shuttle to the grocery store, she went on. You wouldn't have to worry about stairs or mowing or shoveling snow anymore. It would be safer. "I like mowing," I said. "Well, I like supervising the neighbor boy and telling him he missed a spot." Noah snorted into his soda. Susan shot him a look. "Mom," she tried again, "it isn't about the mowing itself. It's about you not having to do it. This house is big. It's a lot for anyone, let alone—" She let the sentence trail off, but the word "your age" hung in the air anyway. "Tom and I picked this house together," I answered quietly. "It has never been too much for us." "That was 40 years ago," she replied. "Everything was different then." She was right, of course. It had been a people house back then. Kids running up and down the stairs, sleepovers and science projects, muddy shoes in the entryway, Tom's lunch pail on the counter at 5:30 sharp. There were late-night talks at this very table about bills and braces and whether Mark should be allowed to take the car out of town with his friends. Back then, the house fit like a favorite sweater. Now, most days, it feels like a coat that's a bit too heavy. But it's my coat. No one likes being told to give away what still keeps them warm. "I'll think about it," I said at last, "because I have learned that those words can buy you a little peace." The visit carried on. Lily showed me pictures on her phone. I pretended I could see them clearly, not wanting to go hunting for my reading glasses. Noah asked again about the old fishing rods in the garage, and I told him they were probably still there, leaning in the corner where Tom left them. His face changed at the mention of his grandfather, that flicker of awkwardness that young people get when death is close in the conversation. Mark stepped out back to inspect the deck, shaking his head and muttering something about soft boards and liability. "You can't stay here forever, Mom," Susan said once. When we were briefly alone in the kitchen, she was stacking plates. "We just want to make sure you're safe. And we could really use, it would be good to know things are arranged." "Arranged," I repeated, tasting the word like a too bitter tea. I didn't ask her what exactly needed arranging. I may be old, but I'm not naive. I saw the way she winced when the mail arrived with another envelope marked tuition. The way Mark sighed over car repair estimates last month. I hear things, even when they think I don't. They left just before 6, arms full of leftovers and promises to call. "Love you, Mom," Susan said from the bottom of the steps, car keys already in hand. "Think about the lake place, okay?" "I'll think," I answered, which wasn't quite a yes and not quite a no. Mark hugged me a little longer. "Don't be mad at Susan," he said quietly. "She's just worried." Worry and control look very similar from where I'm standing, I wanted to tell him, but instead I just patted his arm and said, "Drive safe." I stood in the doorway until their taillights disappeared. The street fell back into Sunday evening stillness. A dog barked a few houses down. The maple in our front yard rustled against the dusk. When I closed the door, the house seemed to sigh with me. It's funny, the way silence sounds different depending on who just left. I moved through the ritual of cleaning up, stacking plates, running water, watching bits of potato slide down the drain. My hands know what to do, even when my mind is somewhere else. It wasn't until I took the recycling out to the bin beside the garage that I noticed the lid slightly propped open. That bothered me right away. Mark is meticulous about closing things. Raccoons, he likes to remind me, as if I haven't lived with wildlife longer than he's been alive. I lifted the lid and saw it. A glossy flyer resting on top of the bottles and cans. The paper had a kind of slickness I've come to associate with promises that are too good to be true. On the front, a silver-haired couple sat on a bench overlooking a lake. They were laughing at something unseen, perfectly relaxed, perfectly content, the kind of staged happiness that makes my skin itch. Above them, Lakeview Village, where your next chapter begins. I didn't need to turn it over to know what it was, but I did anyway. In Susan's neat handwriting on the back were 3 short lines. Call tour dates, ask about wait list, check if they buy homes, as is. Underneath, in smaller letters, Mark, equity could solve the car college mess. Equity, not memories, not history, not the years I spent packing lunches at that kitchen counter, or the nights I stayed up with sick children, or the mornings I watched Tom head off to work in the dark, just money, just numbers. I carried the flyer inside and laid it on the dining table. The smiling couple stared up at me as if to say, "Come on in, the water's warm." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not quite anger, not quite sadness, something tangled in between. My eyes drifted to the corner where the hall closet stood, the one with the sticky door Tom kept saying he'd fix and never did inside. On the top shelf, behind a box of winter scarves and a stack of old Christmas decorations, was a navy blue folder. Important, Tom had written on the tab in his neat printing. The same way he labeled everything in the garage, I pulled it down, carried it to the table, and opened it. There was the copy of our will from 1999, back when the kids were both still home, and Tom's hair was more brown than gray. We'd sat in a stuffy downtown office, signing papers about in the event of death, trying not to laugh because it felt ridiculous at 48. Under that were insurance forms, a mortgage statement from years ago, and then, further back, the documents that made my stomach twist. I recognized them in pieces: the durable power of attorney, the health care proxy, the financial institution authorization, the forms Susan and Mark had brought over after my little fender bender 2 years before, when I misjudged the distance backing out of the driveway and clipped the neighbor's trash can. They came rushing in like I'd wrapped my car around a telephone pole. Susan had fussed over my shoulder. Mark had taken charge of the phone calls. "Don't worry about anything," she'd said, sliding papers in front of me between cups of tea. "It's just easier if we can talk to the doctors and the bank for you standard stuff. Sign here and here." I'd been tired, embarrassed, grateful someone else was dealing with the insurance headache. I hadn't read every line. That is a confession that tastes bitter now. Under the yellow glow of the kitchen light, I read them slowly. Mark's name appeared where mine used to. Agent, it called him. Attorney in fact. My own signature sat at the bottom of each page, rounder and firmer than it looks these days. I pressed my finger to the ink. I wasn't angry with them, in the way you might think. They hadn't tricked me, exactly. They'd stepped in because they were scared of what could happen if I was alone and something went wrong. But good intentions don't change the fact that somewhere along the way, I stopped being the person who decides and started being the person who gets decided for. "I am not furniture," I said into the empty kitchen. My voice surprised me, strong and clear. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street. I took a deep breath that filled more of my lungs than I expected, and then reached for the small drawer next to the stove. That drawer is a history of everything I've thought I might need one day. Rubber bands, from broccoli bundles, half-dead pens, a tape measure, a lone key that belongs to a lock I no longer remember. And in the back, tucked under a roll of tape, the white business card I'd kept for years without really knowing why. Marion D. Keller, attorney at law, it read. Elder law, estate planning, probate. I'd been given the card at Tom's funeral by a distant cousin who said, "You never know when you might need someone who specializes in this stage of life." I'd slipped it into the drawer, thinking I would sort the papers out eventually. Then life kept happening, even without Tom, and eventually kept moving further down the road. I turned the card over in my hand. The edges were a little soft from age. My reflection in the microwave door caught my eye again. White hair pulled back in the same old clip, the slope of my shoulders, the fine lines around my mouth. I didn't look like the kind of woman who marched into a lawyer's office and took control of her destiny. I looked like someone's grandmother who should be grateful for a nice place by the lake. The thing is, I have done harder things than make a phone call. I've walked into principals' offices demanding fairness for my children. I've stood beside hospital beds and signed papers that let my husband go because keeping him alive with machines would have been about my fear, not his dignity. I've fixed leaky sinks and balanced checkbooks and navigated grief's strange terrain for over a decade. I could make one more call, so I picked up the old landline. Yes, I still have one. I like knowing the phone is tethered to something solid, and dialed the number on the card. It rang twice. "Law office of Marion Keller," a woman's voice answered, warm with a hint of tiredness. I swallowed. "Hello," I said, surprised at how formal I sounded. "My name is Margaret Lane. I believe I need to review some documents regarding my estate and my powers of attorney. and I would like to do that while it's still my decision to make. There was a brief pause, just long enough for me to hear my heart beating in my ears. "Of course, Mrs. Lane," the woman said, her tone softening around the edges. "We can absolutely help with that. Let's find a time for you to come in. Are mornings okay?" We settled on Thursday at 10. She asked if I needed directions or if I would have someone bring me. "No," I said. "I can drive myself. It's not far." After I hung up, I set the receiver back into its cradle and stood very still. The house felt different, like someone had opened a window. I could smell the faintest trace of onions and dill still lingering from the salad. The clock on the wall ticked on, indifferent. I went to the bedroom and opened the top drawer of my dresser. Inside, folded between sweaters and old scarves, was the leather case that held the fountain pen Tom had given me on our 25th anniversary. "You always write things down," he'd said, pressing it into my hand with that shy smile he never quite lost. "So, you should have something nice to write with." The pen was navy with a gold band around the center, heavier than it looked. I clicked open the case, took it out, and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it in my palm. Then I went back to the kitchen and laid it on top of the navy folder. The Lakeview flyer still sat beside it, the glossy couple frozen in their staged happiness. I turned it over so that Susan's notes faced down. As I did, I noticed something I hadn't before. On the front, in the lower corner, was a faint fingerprint smudge. It was at an odd angle, as if someone had picked it up quickly and then put it back down. The print looked larger than mine, maybe Mark's, or maybe Susan's, after flipping through brochures like she was planning a vacation instead of her mother's life. For a second, irrationally, I felt almost invaded. My house, my future, my equity, all handled and discussed and penciled into margins without me. I wiped the smudge away with the edge of my sleeve. It didn't change anything, but it made me feel a tiny bit better. I sank into Tom's old chair at the head of the table, the blue folder, the pen, and the hidden flyer spread out before me like pieces on a chessboard. Outside, the light had shifted to that moody late afternoon gray. Shadows pooled in the corners of the room. The furnace kicked on with a low rumble. I thought about my children, about Susan's worry and bossiness, Mark's gentle reluctance. I loved them more than my own breath. That hadn't changed. But loving them didn't mean handing over the last of my independence without a word. They had grown so used to me, being the soft place they landed, that they hadn't noticed how easily they were pushing me aside. Maybe I hadn't noticed either, not really, until I saw that note about equity solving the Carr College mess. I ran a hand over the table's surface, feeling the nicks and dents under my palm. There was the scratch from when Mark did his science project here and insisted on using real rocks, the tiny burn mark from the time Susan tried to make creme brulee with a lighter, the small dent at the corner where Tom once dropped a toolbox and cursed under his breath like the children couldn't hear. Every mark was a story. I was not ready to reduce this life to a listing price. The clock chimed the half hour. I realized I hadn't finished the dishes. For once, I left them. I turned off all but the small lamp by the window, sat back down, and closed my eyes. In the quiet, I could almost hear Tom's voice, the one that used to call me Maggie on soft days and Margaret when he was serious. "Make sure they don't steamroll you," he'd said, joking once when Susan first started bossing us around as a teenager. "You're tougher than you think." back then I laughed and brushed it off. Toughness wasn't something I ever admired in myself. I was the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, who made sure there was enough food and enough love to go around. But now, sitting there with the weight of the pen and the reality of that Thursday appointment, I felt something else rising in me. Not anger, exactly. Something steadier. A decision. I opened my eyes and looked again at the blue folder, the overturned flyer, the quiet kitchen that had seen me through half a century of living. All right, I said out loud, though no one was there to hear it. If they're planning my next chapter, they'd better remember who wrote the first ones. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked, the same one that always did, when Tom came in late and tried not to wake me. For just a moment, I let myself imagine it was him. Then I stood, turned the Navy folder so it faced me like a promise, and began to think, really think, about what I wanted to say when Thursday came. By Monday morning, the decision I'd made the night before had settled into me, the way the first sip of coffee settles into your chest. Warm, steadying, a reassurance that you're still capable of doing the hard things when they need to be done. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice the ticking of the baseboard heater and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I moved slowly through my routine, not because of age, but because I wanted to feel each moment with a kind of intentionality I hadn't felt in months. My appointment with Marion wasn't until Thursday, but the anticipation of it lingered like a secret tucked inside my sweater pocket. I knew the next few days would require a certain amount of pretending, and that pretending is harder when you've lived long enough to feel truth like a weight under your ribs. I made myself oatmeal, sat at the table with Tom's empty chair to my right, and let my thoughts run the way water does when you release a dam, first a trickle, then a flood. I imagined what Susan would say when she found out I'd gone to a lawyer without telling her. "Mom, why didn't you talk to us?" "We were only trying to help." "Are you sure you're thinking clearly?" The last one would sting the most. People don't realize that questioning someone's clarity is more insulting than calling them foolish. It doesn't accuse you of being wrong. It accuses you of no longer even having the right to be wrong. After breakfast, I put on my coat and stepped outside. The October air had a bite to it, crisp and clean, and the maple tree in the front yard was shedding itself methodically, little by little, red and gold leaves tumbling, like deciding whether to fall or hold on. Just one more hour, I stooped to pick up a few branches that had blown down overnight. Though my lower back complained, I ignored it. Let the neighbors think what they want. I wasn't going to stop tending my yard just because my children thought it was too much for me. The Wilsons across the street were out, sipping coffee on their porch. "Morning, Margaret," called Rhonda, her blonde hair tied up in a messy bun that somehow still looked intentional. "Need help with anything over there?" "No, thank you," I said with a smile. "Just gathering these twigs before they take over." I could feel her watching me as I worked, the way people do when they're trying to determine whether they should worry. I straightened slowly and gave her a little wave to let her know I was fine. Inside again, I found myself wandering from room to room in a way that felt different from usual. I wasn't pacing. I was taking inventory, not of things, but of memories, of attachments, of what I might fight to keep and what I might be able to let go. In the living room, There was the quilt my mother-in-law made when Tom and I married. Pinks and greens, now faded but still warm when you pull it to your chin. In the hallway, a row of photographs stretching across decades. The kids in Halloween costumes. Tom wearing the world's ugliest tie. Me with a hairstyle so big I could have floated away. In the small guest room, which hasn't had a guest in years. Boxes filled with school projects and birthday cards, and a ceramic bowl Lily made me when she was 6. Each room whispered a different version of my life. In the afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook I dug out from a drawer, the one with daisies on the cover. I hadn't written in it since Tom died. Grief had made my thoughts feel heavy and private, not meant for paper. But now I needed clarity. I began listing the things I knew for certain. 1, I am not ready to move. 2, I am still capable of making my own decisions. 3, my children love me. 4, my children also think they know what is best for me. 5, they are wrong. Underneath that, I added, 6, I have to handle this carefully. I didn't want to fight with them, not really. I didn't want big confrontations or emotional showdowns. I just wanted a say in my own life, a voice, a little breathing room. On Tuesday, Susan called. I saw her name on the caller ID and took a deep breath before answering. "Hi, Mom," she began in her overly bright tone, the kind she uses when she's trying to act casual, but is really checking up on me. "How are you feeling today?" "Fine," I said, stirring sugar into my tea. "Same as yesterday." "Good. I was thinking, maybe Thursday we could go look at that lake community." I called, and they said if we wanted, they'd have someone give us a tour. My pulse jumped, but my voice stayed calm. "I have plans on Thursday." "Oh?" she said, surprised. "With who?" "Just some errands." It was technically true. "Well, maybe later in the afternoon then?" she pressed. "We could go together." "I'll let you know," I said, which I knew infuriated her. Susan doesn't like loose ends. She likes calendars, color-coded lists, schedules. "Okay," she said after a beat. "Just let me know, Mom. Love you." "Love you too." When I hung up, the weight of what I wasn't telling her pressed against my chest. I hated the secrecy. But I also knew that telling her beforehand would invite too many questions, too many arguments, and I didn't have the energy for that, not before I even knew what my options were. Wednesday passed in a blur of small tasks. I dusted the bookshelves, reorganized the pantry, sharpened the pencils in the kitchen drawer, for no good reason. Sometimes busyness feels like bravery. Around 3 in the afternoon, someone knocked on the door. It startled me. The house had been quiet for hours. I opened it to find Rhonda from across the street, her hands tucked nervously into the pockets of her jacket. "Sorry to bother you," she said. "I just noticed your trash bins were still out. Thought I'd bring them up for you. Didn't want you slipping on the driveway." I blinked slowly. "Thank you, Rhonda. That's kind of you." She shifted her weight. "Everything all right over here? Haven't seen much of you?" "I've been fine," I said. "Just doing some thinking." "Thinking can be dangerous at our age," she joked gently. "Sometimes I get lost thinking and forget what I started thinking about in the first place." I smiled politely. "I'm all right." "Well," she said, stepping back, "if you ever need anything at all, you know where we are." After she left, I stood at the window for a moment, watching the leaves scuttle across the street. Why did everyone keep asking if I was all right? Why did everyone seem to be monitoring me, checking in, hovering? I wasn't frail. I wasn't confused. I was simply planning. And isn't a person allowed to plan her own life, even at 78? That night, I barely slept. My thoughts tugged me in different directions: fear, determination, sorrow, courage. Around 2:30 in the morning, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the living room window, watching the faint glow of the streetlight turn the fallen leaves to bronze. I imagined Tom sitting across from me, his elbows on his knees like he used to when he was listening closely. "I'm doing the right thing, aren't I?" I whispered. I could almost hear his gentle chuckle, warm, encouraging. In the morning, I dressed carefully for my appointment. Navy slacks, cream blouse, gray cardigan. The gold earrings Tom bought me one Christmas when we were too broke for gifts, and he surprised me anyway. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman who had lived and survived and loved and lost, but also a woman who still had the right to steer her own life. The drive to the lawyer's office felt longer than it was. The air was crisp, and the sunlight flickered through the trees like it couldn't make up its mind whether to warm the world or retreat for winter. When I arrived, I sat for a moment in the car, gripping the steering wheel, breathing slowly. Then I gathered my purse, straightened my shoulders, and walked inside. The receptionist greeted me with a familiar warmth. "Mrs. Lane," she said. "Good morning. Mrs. Keller will be with you shortly." The waiting room smelled faintly of lemon polish and something floral, maybe lavender. A wall of law books lined the far side of the room, heavy and authoritative. I sat in a chair near the window and let my fingers trace the seam of my cardigan. A few minutes later, the door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was in her 50s, round face, short dark hair streaked with gray, eyes that looked like they'd seen 1,000 complicated family stories and understood every one of them. "Mrs. Lane?" "Yes," I said, standing. "I'm Marion," she said, offering her hand. "Come on back." Her office was cozy, not intimidating. A small lamp glowed on her desk, and framed photographs cluttered one corner. Children, grandchildren, a dog with lopsided ears. "So," she said gently once we sat, "tell me what's going on." I took a breath that seemed to gather years on the way out. I explained about the lake cottages, about Susan's insistence, about the documents I had signed after the accident, about the flyer in the recycling bin. Marion listened without interrupting, her eyes soft but focused. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. "Mrs. Lane," she said, "everything you've described is extremely common adult children, worrying, overstepping, trying to do what they think is best, even when it isn't what the parent wants." I nodded. "But the important thing is this. You are mentally competent, fully capable, and completely within your rights to revise or revoke anything you previously signed." My shoulders loosened a little. "And your children don't need to be involved in the process?" "Not unless you choose for them to be," she said. "The law is on your side." Relief washed through me so strongly it made my eyes sting. What should I do first? "We'll revoke the old power of attorney," she said, pulling out a folder. "Then we'll create a new one, naming someone you trust or naming no one at all, if that's your preference. It's entirely your choice." "I don't want to name anyone," I said quickly. "Not right now." "Then we won't." She slid papers toward me, explaining each one gently but precisely. I signed with the fountain pen I'd brought, the navy ink flowing smoothly across the page like it had been waiting for this exact moment. When it was done, she gathered the documents neatly. "There," she said with a small smile. You've taken back control. I felt something warm unfurl in my chest, something like pride. Thank you, I said, truly. She nodded. You'll want to think about how to tell your children, or if you want to tell them at all. And that was the question, wasn't it? I didn't answer right away. On the drive home, the sky had turned overcast, the kind of muted gray that makes the world feel quieter. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw something that made my stomach dip. Susan's car, parked neatly behind the mailbox. She was sitting on the porch steps, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the ground as if rehearsing something. My heart knocked against my ribs. She looked up as I got out of the car, surprise flashing across her face, followed by confusion, then concern. She stood quickly. Mom, where were you? Her voice held an edge I hadn't heard since she was 15 and caught me reading her diary. I held on to my purse strap. Out, I said. Running an errand. She stepped closer. I tried calling you twice. I got worried when you didn't answer. My phone was on silent in my bag. I hadn't thought to check. She glanced toward the car. Mom, what errand? There it was, the boundary line, drawn in the gravel of my own driveway. I took a slow breath. Just something I needed to take care of, I said, by myself. She stared at me, confusion swelling into something sharper. What does that mean? And in that moment, with the afternoon light dimming behind her, I realized I had a choice. Tell her everything and face the storm now, or wait just a little longer, until I understood the consequences of what I'd done. I opened my mouth, and then I saw it, on the porch railing beside her, a second Lakeview Village brochure, open, marked with sticky notes, and suddenly the words I'd planned to say shifted on my tongue. The air tightened around us, and I understood, in that split second, that whatever came next would change everything. I stood there with Susan staring at me, her arms folded tight across her chest, the Lakeview brochure marked up like a school project resting beside her hand. And for a moment I felt the shift in the air, the way birds sense a storm long before clouds gather. She looked at me the way she used to look at her own children when she suspected they were hiding something, that mix of concern and interrogation wrapped in a mother's authority. And for the first time in a long time, I realized she wasn't seeing me as her mother at all. She was seeing me as a problem to be solved. Mom, she repeated, what errand? I knew if I answered truthfully, the conversation would explode, unraveling into accusations and pleas and that awful pitying tone I despised. But lying outright would only postpone the inevitable. So I chose the thin space between. Just some personal paperwork, I said, adjusting my purse strap. Nothing urgent. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in that calculating way she inherited from me, the way she used to study math problems as a girl. What kind of paperwork? She asked. The kind that's personal, I said, soft but firm. Her jaw tensed. Why are you being so secretive? Because you're trying to make decisions for me, I wanted to say. Because I can't breathe when you hover. Because the more you push, the smaller I feel. Because I'm afraid that if I tell you, you'll take the pieces of myself I'm trying desperately to protect. But instead I said, Susan, sometimes I need privacy, even at my age. She blinked, stunned, as though privacy were a concept meant only for younger people. Okay, she said slowly. But this, she reached for the brochure, holding it up. This isn't going away. Mom, you can't keep ignoring this conversation. I haven't ignored anything, I replied. I've listened, but I'm not ready, and I don't want to make decisions out of pressure. She looked at me, really looked, as though trying to read between the lines of my face. A few leaves drifted between us, rustling on the porch. We're not trying to pressure you, she said, but even she didn't sound convinced. We're trying to help. I know, I said quietly, but help begins when the person being helped agrees. She let out a breath, frustrated. Mom, you live alone in a big house. The stairs are steep. You don't drive at night anymore. Winter is coming. I've lived through 78 winters, I said. I know how to prepare. That stung her. I saw the flash in her eyes. Fine, she murmured. If you're going to be stubborn, I don't know what else to do. You could trust me, I said, just a little. She opened her mouth to respond, but her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, sighed. I have to go pick up Lily from practice, but this conversation isn't over. Conversations rarely are, I said. She gave me a tight smile, then walked down the steps, leaving the brochure behind. I didn't pick it up until her car disappeared around the bend. I carried it inside and laid it on the kitchen table beside the navy folder from yesterday. The two objects looked like opponents preparing for a quiet war. That evening, I moved carefully around the house, a little tired from the emotional weight of the day I brewed tea, sat in the den, and let the soft glow of the lamp warm the room. But peace refused to settle. At 8:30, the phone rang. It was Mark. Mom? His voice was gentler than Susan's, but weighed down with something unspoken. Hi, honey. Everything okay? There it was again, everyone asking that same question, as if I had become a fragile object they expected to crack. Of course, I said, though my voice was thinner than I intended. Susan said she stopped by. She did, I said. We talked. She's worried about you. I gathered. We all are, he said. You've been distant lately. Distant. The word curled in my ear. I'm just thinking, I said. Thinking isn't a crime. No, he said softly, but thinking alone can make people anxious. I've been thinking alone my whole life, I replied. Silence stretched a moment. Mom, he said carefully, Susan said you were out running an errand today. Yes, I said, I was. Do you want to tell me where? There was no accusation in his tone, only worry, genuine and gentle, but still I felt cornered. Not tonight, I said. It was nothing dramatic. Okay, he said, but I heard the doubt. If you need anything. I know. Good night, Mark. When I hung up, I stared at the lamp's glow, reflecting off the window, turning my shadow into a faint silhouette. I wondered how much longer I could keep this balancing act, holding on to myself, while trying not to hurt my children's feelings. People talk about children growing up and leaving home, but nobody warns mothers that one day they may grow up so much they try to take over. The next morning, I woke with an ache in my chest, not physical, but emotional, the kind that makes you move slower. I made toast, buttered it, took one bite, then abandoned it. I walked from room to room again, touching things lightly. The ceramic bowl Lily made years ago, the wedding photo from 1964, the worn arm of the recliner Tom loved around 11. The phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. Mrs. Lane? A woman asked. This is Karen from Lakeview Village. I was calling to confirm your tour this afternoon. My heart stopped cold. I didn't schedule a tour. Your daughter did, she said cheerfully. She said you might show up separately. My breath tightened. I won't be coming, I said firmly. please remove my name from anything she requested. "Oh," Karen said, startled. "Of course, I'll note it." I hung up and pressed my hand to my forehead. Susan had crossed a line, not just suggesting, not just nudging, but scheduling behind my back. My throat trembled with a mix of sadness and anger. I wasn't sure whether to call her or wait for her to call me. Around 3, there was another knock at the door. Not Susan, not Mark. It was Lily, my granddaughter, clutching a backpack and wearing her Navy school jacket. "Can I stay here for a bit?" she asked. "Mom and Dad are arguing, and I didn't want to hear it." I let her in immediately. She collapsed into a kitchen chair and pulled her knees up, looking younger than her 15 years. "What happened?" I asked gently. "Mom's mad at Dad because he didn't back her up, whatever that means," she said. "And Dad's mad because Mom went too far. I guess it has something to do with you." I sat slowly across from her. "What did you hear?" She shrugged, eyes darting away. "Just Mom saying you're being difficult. Dad said you have a right to make your own choices." My heart swelled painfully at that. Mark defending me. "And then Mom cried," she added softly. "She never cries." I exhaled deeply. "Honey," I said, "your mother loves me very much. Sometimes love gets tangled with fear." Lily picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Are you sick? Is something wrong with you?" "No," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "I'm fine. Truly, I'm just figuring things out." She nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. We spent the next hour talking about school, her friends, her favorite teacher. I made us grilled cheese sandwiches, and she devoured hers like she hadn't eaten in days. When Susan eventually came to pick her up, she looked exhausted, eyes rimmed red, cheeks flushed. "Thanks, Mom," she said, avoiding my gaze. "Lily said she didn't want to interrupt your conversation earlier," I said carefully. Susan swallowed. "Did you talk to someone at Lakeview?" The air thickened. "They called me," I said. "They said you booked a tour." She closed her eyes. "Mom, I only did that because you wouldn't take initiative. I was trying to help you see it." "You crossed a boundary," I said softly. "I don't want to go. Not now." She looked at me helplessly. "I'm scared," she said finally, barely above a whisper. The rawness of it surprised me, but before I could respond, she added, "I don't know how to take care of you if you won't let me." "Maybe I don't need taking care of yet," I said, blue shadows stretched across her face from the porch light. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. My heart broke open. "You're not losing me," I said. "I just want to live my life while I still can." She nodded, wiping her eyes, but the hurt lingered in her posture. When they drove away, I stood at the door, long after the taillights vanished. Later that night, I sat on the couch with the quilt over my lap, trying to calm the storm inside me, when I noticed something strange. The navy folder on the bookshelf was slightly ajar. I hadn't touched it since returning from the lawyer's office. I moved closer. The papers inside weren't in the neat order Marion had arranged. A few sheets were shifted. One envelope was sticking out more than before. I froze. Had I left it that way? Had I been careless? Or had someone been in my house while I'd been in the kitchen with Lily? A ripple of unease moved through me. I stood perfectly still, listening to the creaks of the old house, the settling wood, the distant tick of the clock. Nothing else seemed disturbed, no forced entry, no mess. But that folder. Something about it felt wrong, like someone had touched the private center of my life without asking. I closed it, slid it back, and locked the front door even though I rarely locked it before bedtime. Then I returned to the couch, pulled the quilt to my chin, and tried to slow my breathing. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks. Maybe. But as I sat there in the dim room, a new thought crept in. Quiet, unwelcome, persistent. If it wasn't my imagination, then someone knew I'd gone to the lawyer, and someone might not be happy about it. The house felt suddenly colder, and for the first time in years, I wasn't entirely sure I was alone. That night, I barely slept, not because of aches or pains or the usual tossing and turning that comes with age, but because every small sound in the house felt suspicious, magnified, as though the walls were trying to warn me of something I couldn't yet name. The navy folder sat on the shelf like an accusation, its shifted papers calling out to me every time I closed my eyes. I kept replaying the detail again and again. Had I truly put it back neatly? I always had. That much I was sure of. There's a rhythm to the way older women handle important things. Repetition becomes ritual. Ritual becomes certainty. So why would I suddenly break a lifelong habit? By morning, I felt brittle, like one wrong nudge would make me shatter. I made coffee, holding the mug with both hands to keep from trembling. Outside, a mist had settled over the neighborhood, turning the world into soft gray outlines, the kind of morning where silence feels heavier than usual. I went into the living room, staring again at the folder, wondering if I should call Marion and tell her I was worried someone had tampered with the documents. But what would I say? That papers were slightly rearranged? That I had a bad feeling? Bad feelings aren't evidence. They're just whispers, and I wasn't about to start sounding paranoid. Still, I didn't like the idea of ignoring my instincts either. I decided I'd move the folder, hide it somewhere less obvious. Before I could do that, the phone rang. It was Mark. "Mom, you busy?" He sounded oddly upbeat, which immediately made me suspicious. "Just having coffee?" I said. "What's going on?" "I thought I'd stop by," he said. "Check on the water heater in the basement. Didn't you say last winter that it made a weird noise?" "That was months ago," I said, "and it stopped." "Still," he replied, "I'm in the area." In the area. My jaw tightened. Mark never just happened to be in the area at 8:30 in the morning. "You don't need to come by," I said. "Everything's fine." He hesitated. "Mom, it'll only take a minute." I sighed. "All right. But I'm not asking for help. If you come, it's because you want to." "Of course," he said. But the way he said it made me uneasy, as though there were more he wasn't saying. When I hung up, I quickly grabbed the navy folder and moved it to my bedroom, slipping it beneath a stack of old blanket quilts in the cedar chest. It wasn't a perfect hiding place, but it was better than leaving it in open view. Mark arrived 20 minutes later. He knocked lightly, almost politely, as if he sensed I was on edge. When I opened the door, he gave me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning," he said. "Beautiful day." He stepped inside casually, glancing around in that subtle way people do when they're checking for signs. Signs of decline, signs of disorder, signs of a life coming undone. I hated that look. "Tea?" I offered, because old habits die hard. "Maybe later," he said. "Let me just take a look downstairs first." I followed him to the basement door, but didn't go down with him. The basement stairs had gotten steeper over the years, though I'd never admit it aloud. I listened from the top as he clanked around, muttering to himself. He stayed down there longer than necessary, longer than the water heater inspection required, and something about that prolonged silence made my stomach twist. When he finally came up, dust on his sleeves, he was holding a cardboard box I hadn't seen in years. "Mom," he said, "why do you still have all these old tax records down there? Some of these are from the 90s. "I keep them because they're mine," I said, crossing my arms. "You don't need them anymore," he said. "I can take them to shred." "I didn't ask you to." He looked at me, confused. "I'm just helping." "You can help by leaving things where I put them," I said. The tension thickened between us. He put the box down slowly, carefully, as though setting down something fragile. "Mom," he said gently, "are you sure everything's okay? You sound tense." Tense. There it was again. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." He nodded, though he didn't believe me. "Susan's worried," he added carefully. "She said yesterday you two had a rough conversation." "Not rough," I said. "Just honest." He exhaled through his nose, the way he used to when frustrated as a teenager. "Look," he said, "nobody's trying to push you out of your home. We just want to make sure you're safe." Safe. Such a simple word, but so often used as a cage. "I'll let you know if I ever feel unsafe," I said. "Until then, don't decide for me." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe. "Mom, did you go somewhere yesterday?" My heartbeat paused. "Why would you ask that?" "Because Susan said you were. Acting strange afterward," he said, "like you were hiding something." "I wasn't hiding anything," I said, but my voice was too quick, too defensive. He noticed. Of course he noticed. "If something's going on," he said softly, "you can trust me." And for a brief moment, I almost told him almost. But something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe fear of giving away the fragile independence I'd begun reclaiming. Maybe the memory of that Lakeview flyer with his handwriting on the back, suggesting the sale of my home. "There's nothing to tell," I said. I was running errands. He studied me a long moment before finally nodding. "All right," he said, though doubt flickered across his face. "If you need help with anything, call me." He kissed my cheek, grabbed his jacket, and left. When the door shut behind him, the house seemed to exhale with relief. I locked the door again, not something I usually did during the day. The rest of the morning moved slowly. I cleaned the kitchen, watered the plants, refolded laundry that didn't need refolding. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, my thoughts kept circling back to the Navy folder and the possibility, however small, that someone had been trying to look through it. Around lunchtime, I heard footsteps on the porch. I peeked through the blind. It was Rhonda again. Wonderful. She knocked gently, as if afraid of startling me. I opened the door. "Hi, Margaret," she said, shifting awkwardly. "I just wanted to check on you. Everything all right?" "Why wouldn't it be?" She hesitated. "I saw your son earlier. He looked upset." "He'll be fine," I said. "We had a conversation." "I figured," she said. "He was pacing by his car for a few minutes before leaving." That irritated me. The last thing I needed was the neighborhood keeping tabs on my family's mood. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I'm fine." She nodded slowly, though I could see she didn't believe me. "Well, if you need anything, we're right across the street." I managed a thin smile until she left. I shut the door, leaning against it. It felt like everyone had built their own version of me in their minds, a fragile, unstable woman who needed constant supervision. And the more they saw me that way, the more I feared they might start treating me according to their fears instead of my reality. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, the doorbell rang again. I almost didn't answer it, but the silhouette through the glass looked unfamiliar. When I opened the door, a man stood on the porch holding a leather-bound folder. "Mrs. Lane?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm David Grant," he said, offering a polite smile. "I'm your neighbor a few streets over. I'm also a realtor. I'm sorry to drop by unannounced, but your daughter Susan reached out to me last week regarding the potential sale of your home." My blood ran cold. "Pardon?" He adjusted his glasses. "She asked me to prepare a preliminary market evaluation. I made the report, but when I called her today, she said you might want to review it yourself." I felt dizzy. "I never asked for this," I said. "I'm not selling my home." His eyebrows rose. "Oh, I'm sorry. She made it sound like a family decision." "Family decision." The words hit like a slap. "It isn't," I said, "and I would appreciate if you don't contact me or prepare anything further." "Of course," he said gently. "My apologies." He handed me his card anyway. "If you ever want a second opinion about anything, just call." When he left, I shut the door with trembling hands. I felt violated, not in a physical way, but in the way someone feels when their life is being rearranged around them without consent. My home, my sanctuary, my history, and they were preparing it like a listing behind my back. I went straight to the cedar chest and checked the navy folder. Still there, untouched. But the unease remained. That night, long after darkness settled, my phone buzzed. A text from Susan. "Mom, please don't be mad. We're trying to help. Can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at the message until the letters blurred. But before I could type a reply, a floorboard creaked down the hall. Soft, slow, too deliberate to be the house settling. I froze, listening. Another creak, closer this time. My breath hitched. I wasn't imagining it. I set my phone down silently, heart thudding. Someone was inside the house. Or I was losing my mind. I listened again, palms sweating, every nerve sharp as glass. Then a faint sound, like fingers brushing lightly against the bedroom door frame. My throat tightened. I reached for the lamp switch but stopped myself, afraid of drawing attention. Instead, I sat perfectly still, blanket pulled tight, waiting as the silence grew heavier and heavier, until something, I couldn't tell what, shifted in the dark at the end of the hallway. I wasn't alone. I stayed absolutely still, barely breathing, listening so intently that the thud of my own heartbeat felt like it might give me away. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't peace but warning, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath with me. I strained my ears, waiting for another sound to confirm I wasn't imagining things. And then it came, soft, deliberate, almost tender, like the faint sweep of fabric brushing along a doorframe. My mouth went dry. I wasn't prone to panic. After nearly 8 decades of life, panic isn't something that comes easily. You grieve, endure, adapt. But this was different. This was the instinctive, primal fear that comes from sensing a presence where none should be. I slid one foot toward the edge of the couch, thinking maybe I could stand, reach the lamp, turn it on, show whoever, or whatever, was there that I wasn't afraid. But my body refused to move. I felt like a deer frozen in a clearing, knowing one shift could provoke the predator hidden in the shadows. The hallway loomed darker than usual. My eyes strained against the dimness, searching for the shape I was certain was standing there. I thought I saw a flicker of motion near the bedroom doorway. Something small, a shadow that didn't belong. And just when I thought I couldn't bear another second, the old house let out a groan, the floorboards expanding with the change in temperature. The sound trembled through the quiet, making me jump. Was that what I heard earlier? Just the house adjusting? But no, the earlier sound had been different, more intentional. The house creaked, yes, but it didn't breathe. I reached slowly, quietly, for the remote on the side table. My fingers brushed against it, but before I could grasp it, another sound came, a faint click, like a door closing very softly somewhere down the hall. My eyes darted toward the dark. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice sounded too small, too fragile in the heavy quiet. No answer. I listened harder until my ears ached. And then, unexpectedly, the refrigerator hummed to life, rattling lightly, and the tension inside me snapped like a taut string. The sudden noise made the hallway seem less menacing, less alive. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the stress of the last few days had coiled itself so tightly around my nerves that my own house felt foreign. I exhaled shakily, stood, and turned on the lamp. The yellow glow filled the room, chasing away shadows. I forced myself to walk to the hall. The floor was cool beneath my slippers. The air felt heavier near the bedroom door. I flicked the light switch. The hallway brightened, revealing nothing but empty space. The bedroom door was open, just as I had left it. The bathroom door was closed, but I knew I had closed it earlier. I checked the windows, all locked. Nothing disturbed. I opened the cedar chest just to reassure myself the navy folder was still inside. It was right where I'd placed it. Undisturbed, I pressed my fingertips to its smooth cover. "Get a hold of yourself," I whispered. But deep down, I knew it hadn't been my imagination. Something had shifted. Something in the house felt watched. The next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds, but the brightness felt thin, like a coat that was too light for the season. I went through my routine mechanically. Coffee, toast, checking the mailbox, watering the rosemary on the windowsill, trying to convince myself everything was normal. Around 10, the phone rang. Unknown number again, I answered cautiously. "Mrs. Lane, this is Dr. Whitman's office. We wanted to confirm your appointment for next week." "I don't have an appointment," I said, frowning. "Your daughter called to schedule one," the receptionist replied. "Just a routine wellness check." My stomach clenched. "Cancel it," I said sharply. "I'll make my own appointments." "Of course, ma'am," she said, though I could hear confusion in her voice. I hung up and pressed my palms to my eyes. Susan again. Another decision made for me. Another quiet attempt to take hold of my life as though it were slipping away. I paced the living room, trying to calm the frustration rising in me. I needed space from her, from all of them. I needed a day without someone hovering over my shoulder like I was a child or a patient. I decided I'd drive to the small park by the river. I hadn't been there in months, and the thought of sitting on a bench beneath the old oak trees felt soothing. I grabbed my keys, slipped on my shoes, locked the house, and got into the car. The drive was peaceful at first, autumn gold drifting along the road, patches of sunlight warming the dashboard. But halfway to the park, I noticed a car behind me, a silver SUV. It stayed close, closer than I liked. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe. I turned. Onto Riverside Lane. The SUV turned too. I made another turn. It followed. My pulse quickened, but I told myself not to overreact. It's a public road. They could be going anywhere. I pulled into the park lot slowly. The SUV passed by without stopping. Relief washed through me so abruptly it left me shaky. I laughed under my breath. "You're jumpy," I scolded myself, though part of me wondered why I had become so on edge. I sat on a bench beneath a large oak, breathing in the cool air. Children played nearby, their laughter bright and sharp. A jogger passed. A couple walked hand in hand. Normal. Everything around me was normal. Then my phone buzzed. Susan. "Mom? Are you home?" I stopped by. I stared at the message, coldness prickling across my skin. I typed back, "Out for a walk, I'll be home later." She replied instantly, "Where? I'll come meet you." I didn't respond. I put my phone back in my bag and took a long, slow breath. She wasn't giving me space. She wasn't listening. And the more she pressed, the more I felt myself close inward. After an hour, I drove home. The house looked the same, but felt different, as though the walls had absorbed my anxiety and were giving it back to me. I checked the cedar chest again. The folder was still untouched, but the air still felt wrong somehow, charged, unsettled. I tried distracting myself by baking. I pulled out flour, sugar, eggs, and began mixing a batch of applesauce muffins just the way Tom liked them. The familiar rhythm soothed me. But when I opened the drawer for the cinnamon, I noticed something odd. The drawer wasn't aligned the way I always left it. It sat slightly open, not flush. A small thing, a nothing thing, but it set off a shiver in me. Had I left it that way? Or had someone opened it? I pushed the drawer closed firmly and went back to the batter, trying to shake off the unease. The muffins went into the oven, and I watched them through the glass as they rose. The warm scent of cinnamon filled the kitchen, comforting me. For a moment, everything felt almost peaceful. Then a shadow swept across the window, quick, subtle, like someone moved past the porch. My heart jumped. I stepped closer, peering out through the thin gap in the curtain. No one. Nothing. Just wind stirring the branches. I told myself to stop being ridiculous. The timer beeped. I pulled the muffins out, set them on the cooling rack, and forced myself to focus on the ordinary. I made tea, poured it carefully, and settled into the living room chair. That's when the phone rang again, this time from Susan. I hesitated, then answered. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you went out?" she demanded, her tone already tight. "Because I didn't need to," I said. "I'm allowed to leave my house without announcing it." "You've been acting strange," she insisted. "More forgetful, more guarded." "I'm acting normal," I said. "You're overreacting." "No," she said, hurt, sharpening her voice. "I'm reacting because I care." "Then care by giving me space," I said, more sharply than intended silence. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm afraid." Her voice cracked. "I'm afraid I'm losing you." My chest tightened. "You're not losing me," I said softly. "You're crowding me." Another silence. "I'll come by tonight," she said suddenly. "We'll talk." "No," I said quickly. "Not tonight." "Mom, please." "Not tonight, Susan." I hung up before she could argue. My hands shook afterward. Why was everything turning into a battle? Why did every conversation feel like a fight for territory? I was about to stand and put my teacup in the sink when I heard it again. Another sound from the hallway. Not a creak, not the house settling. A soft, deliberate shift of weight. I turned slowly, every muscle tightening. "Hello?" I called, voice trembling, and this time, unmistakably, someone answered. A whisper, low, just one word, my name. "Margaret." My blood ran cold. The hallway stretched ahead of me, dim and quiet. There was no one there, no one visible, but the voice, hoarse, close, familiar, yet not, had come from the shadows beyond the bedroom door. I set my teacup down without looking away. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. "Who's here?" I whispered. The silence that followed felt alive. A second passed. 2. Then, footsteps, slow moving toward me. I stumbled backward, reaching blindly for the lamp, my fingers shaking so badly I knocked it sideways. The room plunged into deeper shadow. I gasped, backing away until my legs hit the coffee table. The footsteps stopped. My breath caught. And then, from the darkness, something shifted. Something just out of sight. Something waiting. That night, after everyone left and the house settled into its familiar old rhythm, I walked the hallway one last time, pressing my palm along the wallpaper, the way you touch an old friend's arm to reassure them you're still there. The floorboard let out its usual tired sigh. Nothing more, nothing less. And for the first time in weeks, the sound didn't raise my heartbeat, but steadied it, reminding me that not every noise is a warning, and not every shadow hides a threat. Sometimes it's just an aging house and an aging woman learning to trust herself again. I paused by the bedroom door, listening to the quiet, then whispered my own name softly. Margaret, just to hear how it echoed, how easily fear could twist the familiar into something strange, and how just as easily clarity could untwist it. I slipped into bed, feeling not triumphant exactly, but anchored, as if something inside me had clicked back into place. And as I turned off the lamp, I realized the real intruder these past weeks hadn't been a person at all, but the belief that my voice no longer mattered. And now that I'd claimed it back, firmly, without apology, the house felt like mine again. The night air drifted in through the cracked window, carrying the faint scent of lilac, Tom's favorite, and instead of feeling haunted, I felt held, as if life, quiet, imperfect, stubborn life, had settled beside me like an old companion. "I'm still here," I whispered into the dimness, and the soft creak of the settling wood answered, simple as breathing, as if the house itself agreed.